picture this, just for a second. You've just finished dinner.
Right.
The sun is starting to dip below the tree line, and it's painting the sky in these like bruised shades of purple and orange. You grab the leash, and your dog instantly starts doing that little excited tap dance by the front door.
Oh, yeah. Every dog owner knows that exact dance.
Exactly. So you step outside. The air is finally cooling off. You wave to a neighbor who is out watering their lawn. It is literally the most mundane, universally relatable, deeply comforting routine in the world.
It's the suburban baseline.
Right. You are in your safe neighborhood, walking your dog, letting your mind wander after a long day. And there is this implicit promise in this routine, right? You walk the loop, the dog does its business, and you both go back inside to watch television.
Yeah, our entire sociological framework of community trust is basically built on this exact routine.
We map out our neighborhoods in our minds as these safe zones, but what happens when that routine just
abruptly stops?
Yes, what happens when the dog comes back, loose dragging on the pavement, and you don't?
It creates a very specific kind of cognitive dissonance for everyone left behind. I mean, we rely entirely on the predictability of these suburban spaces to feel secure.
Totally.
So when an anomalous event occurs, when that predictability is just shattered without a sound, without a trace, without any logical explanation, it completely short-circuits our risk assessment behaviors. We don't know how to process a void like that.
And that void is exactly what we are stepping into today. We are doing a deep dive into an incredible stack of source material today, specifically the investigative transcripts from a series called the Out of Bound podcast, which is hosted by Demetri Pierce.
The level of detail in Pierce's notes is just staggering.
It really is. We are looking at the meticulous notes, the timelines, the behavioral profiles covering two chilling North Carolina cold cases. We have the 2013 disappearance of Emily Carter in a town called Willow Creek, and the 2004 disappearance of Hannah Whitmore in Briar Ridge.
Right, two cases separated by nearly a decade.
But our mission today isn't just to walk through the tragic timelines of two missing young women. We are going to put these two cases side by side and decode the architecture of these mysteries. Because, when you actually lay them out together,
they mirror each other perfectly.
Yes.
Because when you look at the source transcripts together, the parallels stop being coincidental and start looking like, well, an identical blueprint.
A really terrifying blueprint.
Exactly. By analyzing these incredibly tight vanishings, the behavioral patterns of the suspects, the investigative dead ends, and the bizarre forensics of evidence that appeared literally years later, we're going to uncover the mechanics of how someone can simply evaporate from a populated area.
Evaporate is the perfect word for it.
We'll explore the systemic vulnerabilities of investigations in tight-knit towns and the psychology of how communities process the inexplicable.
Right, so let's get straight into the mechanics of this, because the speed of these vanishings is what defies all logic to me. I want to look at the inciting incidents, specifically the timelines, because they are so incredibly compressed.
They really are.
Let's start with the Willow Creek case from the source notes. It's June 14th, 2013. Emily Carter is 19 years old. She leaves her house at 7:45 p.m. with her dog, Milo, heading for the local creek trail.
Which is a habitual action for her.
Right. She does this almost every single evening. 7 minutes later, at 7:52 p.m., she texts her best friend, quote, "Be home soon." 8 minutes after that, at 8 p.m., a neighbor spots her walking toward the trail.
Just a normal evening walk.
Totally normal. Then, at 8:15 p.m., a fisherman near the water reports hearing a woman's voice. He tells police he can't make out the words, just the cadence of a voice. And then, at 8:57 p.m., Emily's phone stops pinging. It goes entirely dark at a bend in the creek locals call the Hollow.
Let's break down what stops pinging actually means in the context of 2013 cellular technology, because it's so crucial for understanding the timeline.
Yeah, please do, because I think people imagine you just hit the power button.
Right. No, in 2013, smartphones were constantly establishing handshakes with nearby cell towers. Even if you aren't actively on a call, your phone is sending out a signal saying, like, hey, I'm here, I'm looking for service.
It's always talking to the network.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And network providers log these handshakes. So when investigators look at Emily's cellular data, they don't just see a dot on a map. They see a sudden, catastrophic cessation of that handshake at exactly 8:17 p.m.
Catastrophic cessation. That
Oh, no.
sounds violent.
It is. A phone doesn't just stop pinging because you put it in your pocket or because the battery slowly dies. It stops pinging like that because it is suddenly destroyed, entirely submerged in water, or mechanically powered down in an instant.
So at 8:17 p.m., whatever happened to Emily Carter happened. That is the absolute end of her digital footprint.
The exact moment.
But the physical timeline doesn't end there, which is the crazy part. At 9:12 p.m., just under an hour after her phone dies, Milo the dog returns to Emily's house alone. The leash is still attached to his collar, dragging on the ground behind him.
And then we look at the transcripts for Briar Ridge, which takes us 9 years earlier, September 3rd, 2004. Hannah Whitmore is only 14 years old.
So young.
Yeah. She leaves her house at 6:42 p.m. wearing a blue hoodie, jeans, and white sneakers. She tells her mom she's taking the dog for a quick walk and will be back in 15 minutes.
Just a quick trip down the street.
Right. 8 minutes later, at 6:50 p.m., a neighbor sees her walking toward the Briar Ridge Nature Trail. She's alone. The dog is trotting right beside her.
And then the window closes even faster than Emily's case. At 7:10 p.m., exactly 28 minutes after the neighbor saw her, the dog returns to the Whitmore home. Just like Milo, the leash is still attached.
And the notes emphasize this heavily. There are 0 signs of injury to the dog.
Nothing at all.
No blood, no dirt matted in the fur from a scuffle, nothing.
If you were listening to this and trying to map it out in your head, think about the window of opportunity here. For Hannah, in 2004, the perpetrator had a maximum of 28 minutes between the neighbor's sighting and the dog showing up at the front door.
A tiny window.
And for Emily, in 2013, the window is terrifyingly tighter. From the neighbor seeing her at 8 p.m. to her phone dying at 8:60 p.m., that's 17 minutes.
17 minutes?
Think about how long it takes you to listen to, like, 3 songs on your favorite playlist, or how long it takes to boil a pot of water for pasta. That's 17 minutes.
It's nothing.
In that tiny sliver of time, someone managed to intercept a 19-year-old woman and her dog, neutralize any threat, remove her from a public environment, and vanish completely. The logistics of a clean extraction in that time frame seem practically impossible.
Absolutely.
And the immediate response from law enforcement proves how clean it was. The transcripts detail that by 8:00 p.m. in Briar Ridge and shortly after 9:00 p.m. in Willow Creek, these trails were literally swarming.
They didn't wait around.
No, they had officers, volunteers, and canine units sweeping the creek beds, the woods, drainage tunnels, abandoned sheds, everything.
And we really need to talk about the mechanics of those canine searches, because that is where the physical reality of these disappearances becomes deeply, deeply anomalous.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Well, when a canine unit tracks a missing person, the dog isn't just smelling a vague scent in the air. As human beings move through an environment, we constantly shed microscopic skin cells, thousands of them every single minute. They're often referred to as rafts.
Like a microscopic biological trail of breadcrumbs.
Exactly like breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
And in a humid, heavily vegetated environment, like a North Carolina creek trail in the summer.
Oh man, the humidity there is intense.
It's super thick. So those skin rafts get trapped in the moisture of the leaves and the damp earth. A trained tracking dog follows that concentrated scent cone. Furthermore, they track the crushed vegetation.
The crushed vegetation, like broken branches.
Yeah, the bruised grass and broken twigs that actually release distinct chemical compounds when they're stepped on. The canine units in both cases track the girls' paths into the trails, but then right around the areas where they were last known to be, the scent cones didn't trail off into the woods. They just stopped.
They just stopped. I mean, a scent cone doesn't just stop unless gravity stops applying to the person, which means they didn't walk out of those woods. They were carried, or more likely, they were put into a vehicle.
It's the only logical explanation for the scent ending so abruptly.
But that brings me to the detail I absolutely cannot get past. The dogs.
The silent witnesses.
Yes. The fact that the dogs returned home with their leashes still clipped to their collars turns this into a biological locked room mystery. The only witness to the crime is sitting right there on the porch, but they can't speak.
It's so frustrating for the investigators.
But if we break this down logically, I am struggling to understand the mechanics of the abduction here. If a 14-year-old or a 19-year-old is suddenly snatched, physically overpowered, and dragged into a vehicle in under 30 minutes, a dog's biological response is going to be explosive, right?
You would think so, yes.
They would bark, they would bite the attacker, or they would at least come home exhibiting massive signs of trauma or panic.
You're touching on the exact behavioral anomaly that really cracks the psychology of these cases wide open. If we analyze canine behavior in high-stress situations, A dog's reaction is deeply tethered to its owner's emotional state.
So they feed off the owner's energy.
Oh, completely. Dogs are incredibly adept at reading human stress. They smell the sudden spike in cortisol and adrenaline. They hear the spike in heart rate and breathing. If Emily or Hannah had screamed in terror, if there had been a sudden, violent, thrashing ambush,
The dog would have lost it.
the dogs would have absolutely reacted with a fight-or-flight response. The fact that both dogs were entirely calm, uninjured, and simply trotted home instinctually implies a very specific set of circumstances regarding the abduction.
Okay, so if the dog didn't react, it means the dog didn't perceive a threat, which means the owner didn't signal a threat. There are really only two ways that happens. Either the victim willingly dropped the leash to approach someone they recognized and trusted, someone the dog also recognized as non-threatening. They hand off the leash, walk away with this person, and the dog eventually just gets bored and wanders back to its home territory.
That is the first, most statistically common scenario. Familiarity breeds a false sense of security, suppressing the stress response in both the human and the animal.
Right. But if it's not a friend, the only other way a dog doesn't react is if the owner was silenced instantly and completely. We are talking about a scenario where the victim is paralyzed by fear before they can even process the threat to scream.
Yes, that's the darker alternative. We're talking about mechanical or chemical incapacitation, a silent threat, perhaps a firearm pressed into the ribs from behind in a blind spot on the trail.
Oh, wow.
The perpetrator steps out, neutralizes the victim's ability to vocalize with the threat of instant violence, and the victim just freezes. The leash slips from a limp or terrified hand. The perpetrator leads the victim away so smoothly, so quietly, that the dog's protective instincts are never triggered by a struggle or a scream.
Because there is no struggle.
Exactly. The dog just assumes the owner is walking off.
That implies a terrifying level of operational skill. It's not a crime of passion, it's a calculated surgical extraction.
Surgical is the word.
And that level of skill is exactly what forced investigators to look past the physical evidence and start hunting through the suspect lists. Because if we build on the first scenario that the victims might have recognized their abductor, which keeps the dogs calm, investigators always start at the center of the circle and work their way out.
Standard procedure.
Right. And what Demetri Pierce's investigation highlights is that both Willow Creek and Briar Ridge focused on the exact same behavioral profiles of suspects.
It's a standard investigative protocol. You always begin with the people closest to the victim, because statistically, random stranger abductions are incredibly rare.
Super rare.
So the first profile investigators zeroed in on in both cases is the fixated local.
Let's talk about Tyler Hayes, Emily's ex-boyfriend from the 2013 case. The investigative notes show they had broken up just 2 weeks prior.
Which is always a red flag timeline-wise.
Always. He fits the profile perfectly. Recently rejected, emotional distress, friends described him to police as being, quote, obsessed with getting her back, just constantly texting her. But his alibi was that he was home playing video games when she vanished.
Right.
My question is, how does a local police department in 2013 verify a video game alibi to completely clear someone in a missing persons case? That seems so flimsy.
Well, you'd be surprised. In 2013, gaming consoles like the Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 were already heavily integrated into online networks. To verify an alibi like that, detectives don't just ask his friends if they were playing with him.
Oh, they go to the tech companies.
Yes. They subpoena the network providers for the IP logs and server timestamps. They can see exactly when his specific console, tied to his home IP address, logged into a multiplayer server, what game was running, and this is the key part, whether there was active controller input during the 17-minute window Emily vanished.
Wow, so they could tell he was physically pushing buttons during that window.
Exactly. The digital forensics corroborated his physical location. He was home.
That's fascinating. The digital footprint literally saved him from being the prime suspect.
It did.
And then in Briar Ridge, back in 2004, the fixated local was a man named Daniel Price. He was the neighbor living just 2 houses down from 14-year-old Hannah.
Too close for comfort.
Way too close. He was the last confirmed person to see her alive, claiming he waved at her from his driveway as she walked past. But in 2004, you don't have server logs to clear someone. You rely on human accounts.
Which is exactly why the suspicion around Daniel Price lingered much longer in the community. The transcripts note his story never changed, and he had no prior criminal history. But in a small town, proximity breeds suspicion. The neighbors whispered. If he was the last to see her, he knew exactly what direction she was heading, and that she was alone.
Right, he had the information.
But without physical evidence or a shifting narrative to give police probable cause for a warrant, he remained just a person of interest, never a prime suspect. They just couldn't make the leap.
So, when the center of the circle clears out, the police have to cast a wider net. They move from the people who knew the victims to the people who just happened to be in the environment, the proximity bystanders.
Right, the second archetype. These are individuals who have no prior relationship with the victim, but their geographic location at the time of the event makes them impossible to ignore.
They were just there.
Yes. In Willow Creek, this was Mark Dalton, the fisherman. He was physically adjacent to the trail at the exact time Emily vanished. He is the one who admitted to hearing a woman's voice.
And in Briar Ridge.
In Briar Ridge, it was Robert Lane, who went by Bobby. He was the groundskeeper who maintained the nature trail. He was working there earlier that day, but he claimed he packed up his tools and left before Hannah ever arrived.
I want to dig into something specific from the source notes regarding Mark Dalton, the fisherman. The police questioned him twice. The detective's notes stated that Dalton was, quote, cooperative. Maybe too cooperative.
Ah, yes.
I need you to explain the psychology here. How can someone sitting in an interrogation room, trying to help the police find a missing girl, be penalized by investigators for being too helpful? Like, what does too cooperative even mean?
It comes down to the psychological tightrope of police interviews and assessing baseline behaviors. Investigators are often trained in techniques like the Reed technique or cognitive interviewing, where they are constantly assessing a subject's cognitive load.
Okay, wait, what do you mean by cognitive load?
Cognitive load is basically the amount of mental effort required to perform a task. Telling the truth is generally a low cognitive load task. You are just accessing memories.
Because it actually happened.
Right. But formulating a lie, maintaining it, and ensuring it doesn't contradict previous statements, that requires a very high cognitive load. A genuine witness who has just been adjacent to a traumatic, chaotic event is usually nervous. Their memory recall is slightly fragmented or inconsistent.
That makes sense.
They might hesitate or admit they aren't sure about certain details.
Because human memory is inherently flawed, especially under stress.
Exactly. So when an investigator says a suspect is too cooperative, they are identifying a behavioral red flag. It means the individual might be anticipating questions before they are even asked.
Oh, like they memorized a script.
Yes, they might be offering overly detailed, unprompted alibis to fill the silence. They display a complete lack of natural anxiety, almost as if they have rehearsed their narrative beforehand. In the interrogation room, an over-eagerness to please and an artificially smooth delivery can signal deception.
That is wild.
It looks like an attempt to steer the investigation away from themselves by flawlessly playing the role of the ultimate helpful citizen.
So they overcorrect. By trying to look perfectly innocent, they accidentally flag themselves as a master manipulator to the cops.
Precisely.
That is an incredibly dangerous line to walk if you are actually innocent and just trying to be a good Samaritan.
It is, which is why interrogations are so fraught.
But ultimately, neither the fixated locals nor the proximity bystanders led to an arrest in either case. They were scrutinized, interviewed, and let go. Which brings us to the final profile Demetri Pierce identified in his deep dive. And honestly, this is the one that is hardest to process. The phantoms.
The phantoms.
Yes.
The phantoms represent the individuals who are undeniably present in the environment but remain entirely unidentified.
Literally ghosts in the case files.
In Willow Creek, it was the blue pickup truck. Multiple residents told police they saw a blue truck parked near the trail entrance earlier in the week. It had no license plates.
Of course it didn't.
No one could provide a description of the driver. It just appeared in the days leading up to the vanishing, and then after Emily disappeared, it was never seen again.
And the Briar Ridge equivalent is the unknown jogger. Multiple residents reported seeing a man jogging on the trail that evening, right around the time Hannah was walking her dog. No one in the tight-knit neighborhood recognized him.
Which is very odd for that area.
Super odd. And the critical factor here is that he never came forward. When a town is plastered with missing person flyers, a jogger who was on that exact trail at that exact time would logically go to the police to offer whatever eyewitness account they had.
Any normal person would.
Right. The fact that he remains silent is highly indicative of involvement or at least extreme evasion.
And the sociological impact of these phantom suspects on a small community just cannot be overstated. They entirely shift the paradigm of community safety.
How so? Like, why are they worse than a known local?
Because a town can rationalize a fixated local or a proximity bystander. They have names, faces, and addresses. If Tyler Hayes or Daniel Price committed the crime, It means the danger is an isolated bad actor.
I see. It's a known quantity.
Yes. The community can point a finger, excise that person from the social group, and return to feeling safe. But the phantom, the blue truck, the faceless jogger, represents the ultimate fear.
It's the boogeyman.
It completely validates the stranger, danger, anxiety that parents instill in children. It means a random, roaming predator can breach the invisible perimeter of a quiet neighborhood, strike with invisible speed, and just evaporate. The danger isn't a specific person anymore. The danger is the outside world itself.
That is deeply unsettling. And when you have no physical trace, no digital footprint, and the known suspects all clear out, investigators are left staring into a massive vacuum of evidence. And as we know, human beings hate a vacuum.
We really do. We will build narratives to fill it.
We will invent narratives all day long. When you look at the transcripts, you see the police and the townspeople developing the exact same 3 competing theories to explain away the void in both of these towns. Let's walk through the logic of these theories. Theory 1 is willingly leaving or an acquaintance abduction.
This theory is almost always the first reflex for law enforcement because it attempts to neatly explain the lack of a physical struggle and the calm behavior of the dogs.
It puts the agency on the victim.
Right. It assumes the victim initiated the departure. But as Demetri Pierce's source material dissects, it completely falls apart under logical scrutiny.
It makes zero sense logistically. In Hannah's case, she left behind her phone, her wallet, and all her belongings in her bedroom. A 14-year-old planning to run away does not leave without resources or a way to communicate.
They just don't.
And in Emily's case, while the lack of panic points to her trusting whoever she left with, she was 19. She was an adult. If she wanted to leave her life, she could just pack a bag and drive away. She wouldn't need to orchestrate a complex 17-minute vanishing act during a dog walk in the mud.
Exactly. The logistics contradict the theory entirely, which forces investigators to theory 2, the stranger encounter. This hinges entirely on the phantoms, the blue truck, and the jogger. But as we discussed regarding the timeline, the precision required for this is almost superhuman. For a stranger to execute a silent abduction in a 17 or 28-minute window without leaving a single trace or alarming a dog, it strongly suggests a surveillance phase.
Right. They weren't just driving by and saw an opportunity. They were watching.
They had to be. They would need to know the victim's routines. They would need to know exactly where the geographic blind spots on the trails were, the places where the tree canopy blocks the sight lines from the neighboring houses.
Because if a neighbor looks out their kitchen window, it's over.
Precisely. And they would need to know exactly how much time they had before a dog returning home alone would trigger a massive alarm. That level of premeditation points to a highly organized offender, someone who has likely offended before and refined their methodology.
Which is terrifying. And because that thought is so terrifying, a lot of locals in these towns gravitated toward Theory 3, the covered-up accident.
Ah, yes, the accident theory.
You see this constantly in small towns. People would rather believe in a tragic, chaotic accident than a methodical predator hunting in their parks. The geography of both areas makes an accident a physical possibility, at least on paper. The notes mention Briar Ridge has steep, rocky drop-offs near the creek. Willow Creek has incredibly slippery, muddy banks right where Emily's phone pinged for the last time.
The environmental hazards are definitely there.
So the theory posits that the victim slipped, fell, suffered a fatal head injury, and a bystander, fearing they would somehow be blamed back, panicked and hid the body instead of calling for help.
It's a psychological attempt to regain control of the narrative. But if we break down the actual mechanics of concealing a human body in a public nature trail under an hour, the theory collapses under its own weight.
I completely agree. Trying to force these facts into an accident theory is like trying to hammer puzzle pieces from 2 completely different boxes together just because you want the picture to make sense.
That's a great way to put it.
Look at the reality of the terrain. If a 14-year-old or a 19-year-old slips and falls on a public trail, a normal bystander's absolute first instinct is to pull out their phone and dial 911. The adrenaline spikes, the panic sets in, and you look for an authority to take over.
You want help.
Right. Who in the world witnesses a tragic hiking accident and thinks, you know what, I better hide this body perfectly so no forensic team ever finds it?
It defies basic human psychology. To execute a perfect cover-up, the bystander would need to overcome their autonomic panic response instantly. Furthermore, the physical effort required is monumental.
Oh, for sure.
The ground in North Carolina woods in the summer is often baked hard or laced with dense, thick root systems. You don't have excavation tools on a walk. You can't dig a grave by hand in 20 minutes.
And the risk of being seen by another hiker or a neighbor looking out their back window is astronomically high.
Precisely. A cover-up of an accident implies that the bystanders' fear of the police discovering them was overwhelmingly greater than their fear of being caught hiding a body. They had to have a massive overriding incentive.
Like what? What would make someone risk a murder charge to hide an accident?
The most logical incentives involve existing criminal liability. Perhaps they had an active felony warrant out for their arrest, and any contact with police would send them to prison.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or perhaps they were engaged in illicit activity on the trail at that exact moment, a drug transaction, for instance. Or perhaps the accident wasn't a slip and fall. Perhaps it was a vehicular strike by the blue truck, and the driver was heavily under the influence.
A DUI.
Yes, a DUI resulting in death carries severe penalties, which might lead to a split-second, disastrous decision to load the victim into the truck and flee the scene.
But even in that DUI scenario, covering up a vehicular strike with zero trace evidence left behind, no shattered headlight glass, no tire tracks in the mud, no blood drops, requires a level of composure that directly contradicts the drunken panic that would cause the cover-up in the first place. The logic just loops back on itself and fails.
It really does. The accident theory is a psychological crutch for the community, not a forensic reality.
So the families and the investigators are stuck in this agonizing limbo for years. The trails run entirely cold. Until, and this is where the source material pivots from a standard cold case into something deeply, bizarrely orchestrated, both cases experience a delayed breakthrough.
And this is where it gets really strange.
In an unbelievable parallel, both breakthroughs involve a single piece of clothing or jewelry that violently contradicts the established timeline.
Let's examine the specific forensics of these false breakthroughs because they represent the most perplexing anomalies in Demetri Pierce's investigation.
Yeah, let's get into it.
We will start with the timeline of Willow Creek. In 2021, which is a full 8 years after Emily Carter vanished, a hiker is walking off the main path and finds her silver charm bracelet. It was located near the hollow, but a half-mile past the original search grid.
And just to clarify for everyone, investigators had never thoroughly checked this specific spot back in 2013 because it was deemed geographically impossible. They mapped out her walking speed, and it was, quote, too far for Emily to have walked in the 17-minute window before her phone died.
Exactly. But the location isn't the primary anomaly here. The primary anomaly is the metallurgical condition of the bracelet. The transcripts highlight the forensic report. The silver bracelet looked clean. It looked almost brand new.
Which shouldn't be possible. Finding a shiny silver bracelet in a damp North Carolina creek bed after 8 years is like digging up a brand new, fully charged iPhone in an ancient Egyptian tomb. It violently breaks the chronological reality of the environment.
It does. And to understand why, you have to look at the chemistry of silver. Silver is highly reactive to hydrogen sulfide, which is abundant in damp soil, decaying leaves, and creek water.
Right, it tarnishes.
Very quickly. When silver sits in the dirt, it oxidizes rapidly. It turns black and brittle. If that bracelet had been lying in the Willow Creek dirt through 8 years of rain, snow, and summer humidity, it would have been heavily encrusted, tarnished beyond recognition, and likely buried under layers of sediment. The fact that it was clean means it had not been exposed to the elements.
And then we look at Briar Ridge and we see the exact same phenomenon. In 2016, 12 years after Hannah Whitmore disappeared, a hiker finds a blue hoodie matching Hannah's description. It is found near an old maintenance shed off the trail.
12 years later.
Yeah, 12 years. But the forensic analysis yields an even more terrifying result than the silver bracelet. The crime lab runs the hoodie, and there is zero DNA on it.
None. No fibers from Hannah's home. No pet hair from her dog. No trace evidence whatsoever tying it to Hannah or an abductor.
I mean, if you've ever tried to scrub a grass stain out of a shirt, you know how hard it is to remove all traces of an event from fabric. Now imagine removing microscopic DNA after 12 years. Cotton and polyester blends decompose when left in the wild. Microbial activity in the soil breaks down the fibers. For a hoodie to survive 12 years and yield zero DNA, it means it wasn't just washed in a Maytag, it was forensically sanitized.
Yes. The scientific reality of removing all trace evidence requires highly specific chemical processes. You can't just use laundry detergent. You have to use high-concentration bleach, which destroys the DNA structures, or industrial ozone treatments, or prolonged UV radiation.
So we have a pristine silver bracelet and a chemically scrubbed hoodie appearing a decade after the vanishings. The impossibility of these items surviving the elements leaves us with only one logical conclusion.
They were held on to.
Right. These items were kept somewhere safe, climate-controlled, and private for years. And then, a decade later, someone intentionally transported them and placed them at the crime scenes for hikers to find. But why? Why would a perpetrator do this? Are they sitting at home, watching the calendar and deciding to taunt the police?
Psychologically speaking, we have to look at the concept of a killer's trophies. I know. But many highly organized offenders take an item from the victim, a piece of jewelry, a specific article of clothing. They do this to possess a tangible reminder of the event, allowing them to psychologically relive the crime in the safety of their own home. It acts as an emotional battery for them.
But keeping a trophy in your closet is one thing. Bringing that highly incriminating evidence back to the scene of the crime a decade later seems like an incredibly stupid, high-risk maneuver. If a hiker sees you dropping it, you are caught.
It is an astronomical risk, which reveals a lot about the perpetrator's state of mind and the external pressures they might have been feeling. There are two main behavioral drivers for this action.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is arrogance. The perpetrator might still live in the immediate area. Perhaps they actually are the fixated local or the proximity bystander we discussed earlier, someone the police interviewed and let go.
Someone hiding in plain sight.
Yes. Over a decade, they have developed a God complex. They feel entirely invincible, having outsmarted the local police. They return the items to the scene to experience the thrill of the investigation reigniting, knowing they are watching the panic unfold from the sidelines. It is a deeply sadistic power play.
That is just sickening. What is the second driver?
The second driver is manipulation born of panic.
Panic. Why would they panic now?
Well, if you look at the dates in the source material, 2016 and 2021 align with periods when local law enforcement agencies across the country started heavily utilizing advanced digital forensics to solve cold cases.
You mean things like geofence warrants? I've seen that term coming up a lot in recent true crime reporting.
Exactly. A geofence warrant is a reverse location search.
Yeah.
Instead of police asking, where was Tyler's phone on this night, they draw a digital fence around the hollow on a digital map.
Right, they map out the crime scene.
Then they serve a warrant to tech companies like Google or Apple, demanding the anonymous ID of every single device that was inside that geographic shape during the 17-minute window Emily vanished. Once they get those anonymous pings, they look for movement patterns that match the crime, and then they legally unmask the user.
Oh, wow. So if a killer knows the police are starting to pull modern digital data on an old case, they might feel the walls closing in.
Precisely. By taking the sanitized hoodie or the clean bracelet and planting it a half-mile outside the original search grid, the perpetrator forces the police to redraw their maps.
That's brilliant, in a terrifying way.
They force the detectives to reconsider their timelines, pull resources away from the digital search, and essentially embark on a wild goose chase based on planted, useless physical evidence. It is a highly sophisticated countermeasure.
And the fact that the Briar Ridge hoodie was chemically scrubbed of all DNA proves they have the forensic awareness to pull off that countermeasure. It wasn't an accident. It's the signature of a meticulous predator who knows exactly how the system works. It's a really heavy realization.
It forces us to confront the reality of who is operating in these spaces.
Which brings us to the final wrap-up of Demetri Pierce's investigation and the current status of these investigations as we sit here in 2026. Because despite these bizarre planted clues, or perhaps because of them, the reality is stark. Both the Willow Creek and Briar Ridge cases remain entirely open and active.
Still open.
There are still no bodies. There have been 0 arrests. The blue pickup truck and the faceless jogger remain unidentified ghosts haunting the case files. And the families of Emily Carter and Hannah Whitmore still live in those towns. They haven't packed up and left.
They're still waiting.
Every single year, on June 14th in Willow Creek and September 3rd in Briar Ridge, they hold candlelight vigils at the trailheads. They stand there in the dark next to the woods, hoping that someone, somewhere, will finally break the silence.
The psychological endurance of those families is just staggering. A cold case of this nature doesn't just freeze the victim in time, it freezes the entire town in a state of perpetual hypervigilance. The community never gets the closure of a trial or a funeral. They just have the void.
And I think that's why these two specific cases resonate so deeply when you read through the source transcripts. Because you listening to this right now, you have your own Willow Creek trail. You have your own Briar Ridge neighborhood.
Everyone does.
You have that familiar street where you walk your dog, where you know the neighbor watering the lawn, where the streetlights feel like a guarantee of safety. These cases rip away that fragile illusion. They remind us that the mundane, comforting routines we rely on can be shattered in exactly 17 minutes.
Which leaves us with a final, rather chilling synthesis when we step back and look at the totality of Demetri Pierce's reporting. Throughout this entire deep dive, we have been asking, what happened to the evidence?
Right.
We have been looking for the digital footprint, the physical struggle, the biological trace. We view the lack of data as a failure of the investigation.
But if we connect the dots, the pristine silver bracelet, the chemically scrubbed hoodie, the unbothered dogs, and the impossibly tight vanishing windows, it points to something else entirely.
It does. It raises the most unsettling question of all. What if the total lack of evidence is the evidence?
Wow. The absolute absence of footprints, the sudden death of the cell phone ping, the dogs returning entirely unpanicked, this doesn't point to an accident or a chaotic crime of opportunity. It points to a terrifyingly methodical predator or predators, given the decade between the events, operating in plain sight.
Exactly.
They haven't just evaded the system, they have weaponized the safety of the suburbs, turning the absolute absence of data into their ultimate unbreakable alibi.
And that is what makes them so elusive.
The fact that there is nothing to find is exactly what proves how dangerous they really are. Think about that next time you take your dog for an evening walk. Pay attention to the silence. Thank you for joining us as we explored these transcripts. We'll be back next time to dive into a new stack of sources. Until then, stay curious.